I'm Matt St. Jean here with Joe Howie, talking Friars into the second week of the season now. Friars start 2-0. And yeah, it was just do we need to look? I mean, it's 2-0, right? A simple 2-0, nothing to delve deeper into here.
You know what? I think we're gonna when I look back when it's mid-December. Oh, we're going again.
I had the loop button on.
I was gonna say that's new. Normally that ends by the time I start talking, but no. Once we're midway through December, I am certainly not looking back at the nitty gritties of week one. Other than that, we left week 1 2-0. That's as detailed as I'd like to make it. Thank you for listening and have a good night, everybody. Go Friars.
Yeah, and we'll play the outro
No.
again. No, certainly an interesting week 1 here for Providence. Do we want to just jump into that Rider game in the opener?
Yeah, let's do it. Got to rip off the Band-Aid at some point. That was interesting. Yeah. That was the type of game that's not good for your blood pressure.
No, and it was a frustrating team. And I think it makes sense. That was one of 2 games that night in the Big East that were very, very close. It came down to the wire. I don't think it's a coincidence that both Providence and Georgetown struggled with 5 new starters. I think that's bound to happen. The Friars in the opener looked like a team that did not have an identity yet. And they also, I mean, Jared Bynum did not have his best game. Nope. And I think it showed when he didn't, they didn't have another guy ready to step up. Obviously, that's game 1. But we'll see what happens as things develop. But game 1, they didn't have somebody ready to fill that hole.
Yeah, that I think is probably the biggest issue. You're asking guys like Bryce Hopkins, who really hasn't been much of a role player at the D1 level yet. Guys like, Ed Croswell, who was a bench player last season. You're asking guys that are unfamiliar with the starting role to really step into those shoes, especially in the absence of Bynum, who really was a sneaky starter last season. Came off the bench, but played starter minutes, put up starter numbers. So without him, you're asking a younger crop of guys, a newer crop of guys that haven't necessarily taken the floor together, mind you, for a significant period of time historically, to step into those roles. I think, another aspect going into this is I think the fan base collectively undervalued Rider going into it. I know you and I shared some of our cautiously optimistic takes on our preview show. And as the game was unfolding, I was like, wow, we undervalued Rider to that point.
I'm glad that we had said that we should take the under here and take Rider on the spread, because they came ready to play as we expected them to. And I think we saw a defense that was not quite ready. I think that's still absolutely the case. Yep. Just missed aside. It's not that these guys are bad defenders. I think there might be we could talk about what the ceiling is on this defense, but it's not that they're bad defenders. It's that they just don't know how to play together yet. And they're not communicating. And Rider only took 14 threes. They hit 9 of them like that. Part of that's them coming ready to play. Part of that's them getting hot and confident early. Part of that's the Providence defense not executing the way it needed to in stretches. And I think they held them to 65 points too. So I think the defense overall did a good job, but it had its weaknesses.
I think that's a great point. We did hold them to 65. I will say if you give up 9 threes to a conference opponent, they're sweeping you out of the building. So thankfully it was Rider. But I think if you look at individual performances like Clifton Moore, Devin Carter, they had athletic individual defensive performances. Clifton Moore had 4 blocks. Carter, was all over the place. They switched him onto Murray Jr. and shut him down in the second half.
He had 5 steals.
5 steals. Jeez, I missed that stat looking at the box sheet. So I think if you look individually across the box, the box score, there's individual defensive statistics that you can pull out of it. But now you need to piece it together holistically as a team, because giving up 9 threes to Rider, okay, fine, you get the pass. We gave up another 9 threes to Northeastern. Now it's only 2 games, so we're getting ahead of ourselves here. But this is a little bit of a trend here that opponent 3-point shooting is something that we really need to start closing out on as a team. And I think that starts with defensive switching, getting beat on blow-bys and then the kick out. It's just there's some team defense here, some communication that needs to be tightened up, especially, with the uptick in talent that we're going to see at the end of this week.
Yeah, and I think it's mostly just switching on the outside. That's
Yeah.
probably the biggest thing because the interior defense has mostly been solid. I think
Yeah.
rebounding was a little bit of a concern in that game too. Ryder had 11 offensive rebounds, which it's can't give a team like that more opportunities to hang around. Um, yeah, I mean, and that was really it. It was Ryder hit big shots and got a couple second chance looks. Defensively, other than that, I think it was good. It was really the offense only putting up 66 points. And oh boy, was the shooting all over the place.
This looked like, trying to think of a funny comparison. Did you play CYO, Matt?
I did not.
So growing up, I played CYO, right? It's basically it's youth basketball, and
Mhm.
every year there was an all-star game, and they picked the highest scorers of each team and kind of threw them out on the floor. And every time someone got the ball, they chucked it. It was from three, it was from under the rim, but a lot of the shots missed. It looked like a CYO all-star game where everyone knows that they're the best, and they come in and they just start chucking shots up wherever they want. Obviously, these aren't CYO players; they're Division I college athletes, and they're not the best. They've come here for a reason, but it didn't look like a well-oiled machine like last year's team. And I don't want to use last year's team as a benchmark, but that's really all we have to compare them to. Is
Yeah.
that's what you left off on, and this is what you're coming into. Obviously, we watched game 2 and there was some improvements, but the game 1 offensive efficiency and the cohesion as a team just was not there.
No, and that's also, I mean, the free throws are probably the biggest. Anytime you have 43 free throw attempts in a game, not only should you be winning, you should be winning by a lot.
Yeah.
They left 17 points out there on free throws. You make half of them, literally like half of them. And this is going to be, I don't know, a 10-point game at the end. Yeah, totally different ball game. They could not shoot threes either, just 4 of 19 from deep. And I think a lot of that was Bynum. Locke looked pretty good. I mean, he was only 2 for 8, so maybe not as good as I remembered. He's the only guy that hit multiple, though. Bynum 0 for 4 from deep, and then 1 of 5 from inside the arc. So he was just 1 of 9 from the floor. The shooting just all around. Unless it was close to the rim, it was not there.
Yeah, it didn't. I don't know what to attribute that to. I think part of it is probably opening night jitters. You're coming out into a 90% full arena. This is the first time you're playing together. I think guys get in their own heads. I will say Bryce Hopkins looked good in the opener.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
From our preseason previews, from my article that I was shaky on him coming into the season. I didn't know what a Kentucky bench player was going to do with, these new shoes to fill. I think he did pretty well. I'll tip my hat. I think it shows that Cooley trusts him a lot. He played 30 plus minutes in both outings. That's impressive. He looked pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he has the most minutes played. Yeah, he leads the team in minutes played, which I think part of that is just due to his position. Nobody else does what he does, really. But yeah, it's the first half of that Ryder game on its own. He nearly set a new career high for minutes played.
Oh my God.
So that gives you an idea for how he played. I think 16 minutes in the first half, and his career high for minutes played was 17.
Wow.
Yeah, so that tells you what his usage was at Kentucky and now what you're looking at Providence. He's averaging 34 and a half minutes a night right now, more than double what he had in his best game at Kentucky. So a bigger role there. I think he needs to learn how to use his body a little bit more.
Oh yeah.
I think that's one of my kind of, and we'll talk about the second game in a minute here. One of my causes for concern with Hopkins is just he does not look as physically dominant against some of these guys that I think you would hope for. And when you're looking at Big East play, that's where that starts to maybe become a factor. I don't know if we've seen the 3-point shot from him either. And I think, yeah. And I think that's where my overall biggest concern with this team, which we're not going to have this answered probably until the games at Mohegan Sun, at least we're not even going to start to get an idea of what the answer is. It's a lot of talent. This team has players that are good at a lot of things. I don't know what group of 5 players you can put on the floor that maximizes being great at a lot of things at the same time. It's just making the puzzle pieces fit together.
Yeah. To your point on Hopkins and his physicality, for a guy of his girth, I would like to see him start bullying people in the paint. And you're playing the Riders and the Northeasterns of the world. Like those are teams that are not necessarily physically dominant. If anything, I'd say both teams really had their way with us with the jump shooting. So they didn't really necessarily own the paint. And with the size,
Ryder shot 34% inside the arc.
yeah. So there you go. With the size that we have on the inside, I think Clifton Moore did a good job in the paint. I think Ed Croswell did a good job in the paint. I think if you want that trifecta, you need to get Hopkins playing dirty down low. I mean, Horkler wasn't afraid to do it. Alpha Diallo certainly wasn't afraid to do it. If you're going to play this hybrid 3-4 spot, you need to be physical. I think one other thing too, and this could just be me, I don't know if you notice it too, Hopkins drops a ton of passes when he's under the rim.
Yeah.
And it was driving me nuts because there was one point on there was one point in the game where I was definitely a 24-ounce tall boy and half deep, and they gave him another pass under the rim that he dropped. And it was one of those sequences where it's like Devin Carter had the ball, then he passed it to Bynum, and then Bynum passed it to Hopkins. I don't know the order, but there were 2 or 3 passes, and Hopkins had it, went for the power dribble, and dropped it. And I was like, you don't need to do that. And then he did it again against Northeastern. So I think ball security too is something with him that I'd like to see improve, especially if you're going to be the guy that's getting those, those dump offs for the nice lay-in or the dunk or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, he looks like a guy that has not played a ton of competitive college basketball and is still finding his groove. So
yeah,
we're first week. We're not going to raise any alarms just yet on that. Friars obviously hang on late. Ryder with a late run there, a late push, turnover, and then Ryder gets the ball with a chance to go ahead there and get the last shot. And the guy slipped, turned the ball over, and that was the ball game. That was our headline there. It says the luck continues. I do believe the Friars are 8th in Ken Palm's luck metric right now.
So it starts.
I love it. I love it. We're starting early. We are starting early.
So it begins.
Yeah. All right, let's jump ahead here. Game number 2. Much, much better against Northeastern. This is the Friars team we were looking for in this game. Not in the first half.
No.
The Friars had a lead there at the end of the first half. Not a big one. Going to the second half, Northeastern actually takes a 41-40 lead. And the Friars just basically ran them out of the building from then on. 89-65 was the final. In this one, a lot of guys with points. The biggest story of this one is probably Jared Bynum, 21 points. It looked like he was back in his bag.
Yeah. This was prime Bynum from last season. He flirted with a double-double, had 21 points, 9 assists. He was back to Superman Bynum that Ed Cooley called him in the postgame. And this is what you need. I think the play of Jared Bynum and the offensive performance of the team go hand in hand. And the proof is in the pudding. Night 1, Bynum doesn't have a great game. The offense sucks. Night 2, Bynum has a great game, dishes 9 assists. We put up 89 points. Mm-hmm. That's not a coincidence. That is cause A, cause B. So if this team is going to be successful going forward, Jared Bynum really needs to be on. I also think too, and this is someone we haven't mentioned yet, but he's really stuck out to me. The play of Clifton Moore has been such a nice surprise. There was no preseason hype around him. There was really no off-season hype around him. He was kind of just an extra add-on transfer onto the crop of Hopkins, Carter. He was like, oh, Clifton Moore's coming from LaSalle, and he has been a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, and honestly, from some of the stuff we heard in the scrimmages, the exhibitions there, I was wondering if he might end up being third on the depth chart behind Rafael Castro.
Yeah.
Instead, and I want to talk about this with you, I think he has an argument to be in the starting lineup. He's been able to hit the 3 ball, which is not something he's really done with any consistency at any of his previous locations, which is huge. This team, I mean, he can kind of help fill the gap of Noah Horkler there.
Yep.
And when I look at this lineup, one of the things that jumps out to me as a possibility, and I think you're going to like this once I explain
I
it.
think I know where you're going with it, but yeah.
You're going to have Clifton Moore in that starting lineup, and you go Bynum, Locke, Hopkins, Moore, Croswell.
Yep.
Your guy off the bench is going to be Devin Carter. He's going to be your energy guy in a very similar way to the way Bynum was. He's not the shooter,
Nope.
but as we saw with those dunks and that alley-oop last game, he is freakishly athletic. If you haven't seen
Yeah.
his high school highlight tape, go do that right now and then come back because there's some crazy dunks in there. What do you think of that as a possible way to do this?
So before, when you said, this was probably like 3 or 4 minutes ago, you said we don't have that set 5 guys that are going to be out there that make a difference. 5. In my head, I went Bynum, Locke, Hopkins, Moore, Croswell. That's where my thoughts went immediately. And then hearing you just say that now kind of confirmed everything I've been thinking. And to your point about Clifton Moore being a starter, on opening night, I turned to my brother Jack and I was like, Clifton Moore is going to start by December because he has just been so good. And you can tell when he's on the court, he doesn't have the dominance and attention that Nate Watson had in the paint, but there's just something different about the way he plays where it's like you can't leave him open in the paint, but if he sneaks outside the 3-point arc, you can't let him do that either. He's just
no.
It's like Noah Horkler and Nate had a baby and you have Clifton Moore. That's where he comes from.
And hopefully he can keep shooting like this. He hasn't done that in the past. So if he's able to do that this year, that is a bonus from what we've seen on him. The 3-point shooting in general hasn't been great. Bynum is just 2 for 7. Locke is 4 for 15. Those are probably your 2 big guys. And Hopkins just 1 for 3. I think a lot of that is also they're establishing a rhythm here. So I want to see how that ages. Another guy I just want to mention briefly is Allen Breed. I think is maybe one of the more interesting guys on the team right now. I think his defense has been really solid. He's only taken 2 shots and he made both of them. That's all he's done. He's averaging 1 shot a game. Yeah, and I look at that and I'm curious because I feel like this offense needs another shooter. And Breed he's making both shots, but I'd like to see him get engaged a little bit more on the offensive end. In general, the offense looks like everybody's looking for somebody else to take a shot a lot of the time.
Yeah, I kind of got that sense too, especially, I know we're talking about the Northeastern game, but on opening night, there was a lot of passing, and that turned into a couple of turnovers because it just doesn't look like anyone's confident with the ball. Fast forward Saturday night, it looked a little bit different. I think Bynum playing with a full head of steam downhill helps that. I think case in point is that corner Noah Locke 3 that put us up 10 in the second half as a part of an 11-0 run. I think that is like the perfect example of like you need Bynum to be on in order for guys to get shots, because if that's Allen Breed, if that's Jaden Pierre coming up the court with the ball, Noah Locke doesn't get that opportunity. But taking a step back to what you said, you don't have, with Allen Breed, you don't really have much to go off of from last season. He was kind of he was a pretend starter while Bynum was hurt. And then when AJ Reeves was hurt, going back a year prior, he had a solid defensive freshman year. But again, like Duke and Reeves had all the scoring. So
and he had that one game against Villanova where he had 18 points.
Yeah, he had a double, 18 and 10, I think.
Yeah, and we haven't seen much from him as a scorer outside of that. I think I'd like to see. I mean, maybe he just knows he's not a shooter, and that's why he's not shooting as much. He's picking his spots, but I think this offense needs one other guard who can reliably hit shots. I am not sold that it is Devin Carter based on his history either. He's a lot of things, but a shooter isn't one of them. He's basically a small forward in disguise.
Yeah. I was gonna say he's not a shooter. I'm happy you said that because he starts at the 3, but he doesn't have the typical build of a 3, but that's how he plays.
No, here's something for you. Noah Locke attempted a dunk in that game against Northeastern, I believe.
I saw your tweet. I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, that would have been his second dunk ever in college. Devin Carter had 2 dunks in the game, and I don't know how many dunks he's averaging right now, but it feels like he's averaging 2 a game. Those guys are the same height. They're listed at the same height.
Jeez.
And that's when you watch, like, I don't know if I've said it on here or just to you, but when you watch them, Noah Locke looks like a 6'3" guy that plays like a 6'1". Carter
Yeah.
is 6'3", but he plays like he's 6'5".
Yeah, you have.
That's
I've heard you say that before.
yeah. So it's just figuring out how to use those guys.
Yeah,
But it's I think it's a fun group of players at least.
it's it's different. It's
Yeah.
something that we certainly haven't seen before. You when you watch this team, you get the sense that there is a lot of raw talent on this roster, and I think
Mhm.
that's been a lot of the narrative coming into the season. That this roster is filled with raw talent. I think the
Mhm.
challenge now is cultivating this talent in a way where they play as one cohesive unit and they
Mhm.
play efficiently through conference play. Because we've seen Cooley rosters with raw talent that are burning dumpster fires in Big East play. I think of the COVID year 2020-2021 team. I mean, David Duke is a role player on the Brooklyn Nets right now.
Yeah.
Nate Watson is very good. AJ Reeves is very good. And that
He's on
was your
the G League Celtics team.
right. Like that was a team with talent, but they didn't necessarily play together. There were times when it was the David Duke show. There were times when it was the Nate Watson show. There were times when it was the AJ Reeves show, but it was never all three at once. And I think
Yeah.
the times when it was all three at once, you saw what looked to be a special team. I think of that
Yeah.
Xavier game when Noah Horkler went off. So
Yep.
fast forward now to this year, you know, Hopkins has been consistent. Clifton Moore has been consistent. I think otherwise you need to find someone outside of Noah Locke chipping in 10 to 13 points a game and Jared Bynum, I think you need that fifth piece.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what they're trying to figure out here. They don't have a ton of time to do it. The first real game, like first tough opponent, comes on Saturday. They'll get Miami in the Basketball Hall of Fame tip-off at Mohegan Sun. That'll be
Yep.
4 o'clock on ESPN News on Saturday. They'll play Maryland or St. Louis at 1 or 3:30 on Sunday. They got one more game before then. That is tomorrow night, or if you're listening to this on Tuesday, tonight, 5 o'clock at the AMP on FS2 against Ed Cooley's alma mater, Stonehill. Stonehill's first year at D1, the Skyhawks lost 85-54 to UConn already. So they've already lost to one of these Big East teams. Just briefly here, so we're going to wrap up. In a sentence or two, what are you looking for in this game?
Stonehill is somewhere in the 300s on KenPom. I don't even remember the number. It was so low. We are
They're currently
61.
344.
That's what it was. So they're 344. We're 61. Um, don't give me a heart attack.
Yeah.
That's my sentence. Is don't give me a heart attack and cover the spread.
Yeah. Well, you heard it there from Joe Howie. Also, while we're talking about the AMP, as we're wrapping up here, I just want to give a shout out to the fans for absolutely packing it for the first two games. It's been
Yeah.
incredible to see that. I know when we were freshmen, I remember going to the first game of the year, showing up like 30 minutes before tip, going down to the front of the student section and sitting in the front row.
Yeah.
So the times have changed.
Yeah. Um, no, great point, Matt. I wrote about this in my piece on House Enterprise, but I was, you and I were active members of the Friar Fanatics Club. I was president senior year. It took an arm and a leg to get students there in the non-conference. I mean, the only game that we really didn't have to put any effort into was the URI bi-yearly visit. Um, to see the risers on the opposite end of the court overflowing into the nosebleeds where regular season ticket holders sit, that's impressive. That's
Yeah.
really impressive, and it's a testament to what the athletic department has done, but also what the team has done. Like Providence basketball is on the map now, and if you told me 2 years ago that we were going to be selling out student tickets for over 2,000 heads for a Northeastern night game, 8 p.m. game on a Saturday night in early November, I would have told you were nuts, and they did it.
Yeah.
So
It's
that's impressive.
very, very impressive. That's going to do it for us in this episode. We're keeping it quick. Joe, before we go, we have merch available. Do you want to let people know where they can find it?
Yes, so if you head over to the House Enterprise website and hit the merch tab, you will see the Flex has its own shop of merchandise. It's been 2 years in the making, so we finally have our logo on some t-shirts, some hoodies, some vests and hats for you guys.
Yeah.
The holidays are coming up, so if you're an avid Flex listener, go and get your t-shirt, get your family gifts. Um, we'll promote that on Twitter. We'll put some links out there, but definitely
Yeah,
be sure to take a look at that store.
yeah, if that link isn't already in the link tree that we have, we'll have to make sure to throw it in there so you guys can go get that stuff. I think that's gonna wrap it up for us here. Go buy some merch, support us. We always appreciate that. Use that SeatGeek code that you see down at the bottom too. That'll give us a little bit of money. So definitely go do that. Friars playing tomorrow, 5 o'clock against Stoughton Hill. Big game, Joe. Gotta win this one. Gotta get to 3-0. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll be talking to you later. For Joe Howie, I am Matt St. Jean, and thank you very much for listening.
Go Friars.